focused on making APIs easy to use, really providing everything that your developers would need to start using your API. So let me just talk for a little bit about what APIs are and why they're useful. So APIs really, so the old story is that software is eating the world. But what we're realizing more and more is that all these different pieces of software need ways of communicating with one another. And APIs are the way to do that. So for instance, Uber might provide an API at uber.com/call-a-car, where you can stick in a latitude and a longitude and a user's credentials, and all of a sudden a car is on its way to pick that user up. And this is great for Uber because it's obviously a new stream of revenue. It gets them free advertising when, say, like Google Maps comes along and sticks in a call an Uber button inside of their app. And it also allows your product to really become an ecosystem as other software companies and other companies really start building on top of your API. You have a lot more organizations who have a vested interest in seeing your product succeed. And you can see from this pie chart on the right too, it's not just for tech companies, it's really anybody that has any kind of data or service that other people might want to link into. They can provide an API to achieve that. So this quote stood out to me from the last couple of weeks, that an API is really only as good as its documentation. You can take all the time in the world to produce an API that provides a whole bunch of really neat data or services. If you don't tell people about it and tell people how to use it, they're not going to be able to. So that brings me to the second quote, that users don't want documentation, they want answers. They're not coming to your developer portal because they thought it would make for really interesting reading. They're there because they have a question or they have a problem that they need to solve, and they think your API might be able to help. So you really want to give them those answers as quickly as possible, and this is where LucyBot comes in. What we do is we take in a machine-readable spec of your API, so basically just a list of all its inputs and outputs, and then from that we can generate documentation, we can generate sample code, we can generate an API console that'll let people play with your API, see what it can do. So I want to show you guys a couple demos here. So you can really get a sense for what LucyBot gives you. So this is the Hacker News portal on our site. Hacker News is one of the first APIs we integrated. And you can see it starts with just a high-level overview of everything the API can do. This is just a human-readable description of what the API does, what you might want to use it for. Documentation page is what traditional API providers offer, which is a very comprehensive list of all the inputs and outputs for the API. You can click on an individual endpoint and see, like, this is how you get the details for a given story. It's a very dense page. It's not very fun to play with, but this is traditionally the sort of minimum you have to provide for your API developers to know how to use your API. What's cooler is the console, where we can actually start hitting the API, seeing how it will respond. So the console is neat because it actually lets you see exactly how the API will respond given certain inputs here. So you can type in Brennan there if you want to see my Hacker News. So we can actually see my profile in Hacker News here. And what's really neat too is if you go down, you can see this bottom endpoint has been tagged as a visual endpoint. So if you expand that one, this endpoint retrieves a list of stories from Hacker News. Normally you just see this raw output, which is a list of numbers. It's a list of story ID numbers. But what we've done is we've added a visual layer on top so that you can get a little bit more information from this. If this page loads, it'll actually show, the title of the article, a link to that article. It's a lot easier to understand what the API is actually doing under the hood. Much nicer than just a list of article IDs. And you can see at the bottom there, you get all this sample code and a bunch of different programming languages for actually calling the API. You don't have to leave it up to developers to read through your documentation and translate that into their programming language. They actually have code that they can copy and paste or use as a template. So I think that's all we have for you today. But we can open it up to Q&A now, and feel free to come up to me, and I'm here with Andrew as well after the presentation.
How do you guys make money?
So it's free to upload an API into our gallery of APIs. Once you want to either embed that API or embed that documentation on your own developer portal, or start using some of our more advanced features around code automation and things like that, that's when we start charging.
product like API?
So products like API are really focused on the entire API lifecycle generally. They serve as a middleman for your API to perform things like analytics and things like that. We're purely a developer experience company where we're purely focused on giving your developers everything they need to use your API. API kind of does that, and a lot of the other big API companies do that on the side as kind of an afterthought because it's something that every API provider needs to do. But nobody's really provided as complete a set of developer tools as we have with sample code and allowing you to blog about your API and keeping that all up to date using an API spec.
Is there any way to automatically generate the descriptions?
The descriptions of...
Like the technical description you had to enter in at the beginning.
So there are a bunch of neat little editors for doing that. I'm working on a way to take HTML documentation and translate that into the spec you need to upload, but it's about, for a small API, it's maybe 30 lines of configuration to get all that sample code, documentation, console, and everything. Anybody else?
I'm not quite understanding. It's not like it's doing code analysis. There's a LucyBot kind of API that you write around your own API. Is that the idea?
So there are a bunch of different formats for basically specking out how your API works. One is Swagger, which is what we rely on right now. Others are like RAML, API Blueprint, IO docs. But they basically all do the same thing. They say, these are the endpoints my API has. These are the inputs for each endpoint. These are this is the format of the output. And we can take any of those machine-readable specs and generate sample code for on the API, generate the documentation, the console, all from any one of those specs. Cool. If there's nothing else, thank you guys for having me. It's been a blast, and feel free to go to me or Andrew afterwards.